All right. Well, welcome everybody. Sorry for this little bit slow start here, but we are all set to go, and thanks for being here. Uh, it's great to see you all here for the New Hampshire Network for Environment, Energy, and Climate, our first of two January events, in which we are going to get an inside view of some of the cool distribution innovations that the New Hampshire Electric Co-op has been working on. It's becoming increasingly clear, I think, to all of us that the efficient energy distribution is one of the biggest, most complex challenges facing us as we transition toward a new energy economy. Our electric grid was designed in the 20th century, and it's still sitting within that old 20th century paradigm, but it's changing rapidly. It will be changing rapidly in the near future. And we'll be hearing about some of those alternatives tonight. I'm Reinmar Zeidler, member of the steering committee of the New Hampshire Network. I'm going to just take care of a couple of homeworking or housekeeping details before handing it off to my colleague, Joe Kwasnik, who will moderate tonight's conversation. First, let us keep in mind that this event takes place in Ndakina, the ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude this land, waterways, and the people who have stewarded Ndakina throughout the generations. And secondly, let us remember that everyone should stay on mute the whole time, just to prevent echoes and other unwanted disturbances. Thanks very much. And if you have comments or questions or feedback, please do drop them in the chat. We will plan on having a good bit of time at the end for questions, but you can always put them into the chat and thus remember them, and we'll also pick them out of there. So, and now I would forthwith like to introduce Joe Kwasnik. We'll introduce our guest speaker. Joe is a founder member of the New Hampshire Network and sits on the steering committee. He served for years as chairman of the board of the New Hampshire Electric Co-op and is thus a true treasure trove of institutional memory. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Reinmar. I'm not sure how much memory is left, but we'll try to make it do tonight.
We'll see.
Absolutely. Thank you all for coming on tonight. I know it's a tough Friday night, but we're hoping that the next hour or so you'll find pretty interesting and give you an insight in terms of where some of the leading lights of the electric distribution grid in New Hampshire are actually heading. So tonight we'll be talking about Transactive Energy. I'll give you a brief primer on that, because what the heck is Transactive Energy? But we'll talk to you about that. It's going to be about 1 hour in length, and you'll hear some of the dynamic work that New Hampshire Electric Co-op is doing. And tonight we have with us Brian Callnan. In fact, it's interesting. 1 year ago, he actually gave us did a meeting for us where we talked about the grid, the electric distribution and transmission grid. So it's good to have him back after a year. But let me tell you a little bit about Brian. He's the vice president of Power Resources and Access for New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. He joined NHEC in 2017 as the director of its Power Resources and Access. Brian assumed his current position at NHEC in 2019 and is responsible for managing the cooperative's power resource portfolio strategy. And I think if you all recognize, that's where other utilities in Hampshire, the investor-owned utilities, have ended up with prices that are quite high this year. And I have to trumpet the New Hampshire Electric Co-op because of their ability to go out into the market when energy can be sourced relatively economically. They now have the lowest energy prices in New Hampshire, which is quite a feat. Brian began his utility career in 2003 as a resource planning analyst at Burlington Electric Department with a focus on energy efficiency evaluation and systems design. In 2007, he moved to Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, a joint action agency of 12 Vermont municipal electric systems. He became the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority's Director of Power Supply and Transmission in 2010. In that position, he was responsible for all aspects of power supply, and transmission, including representation of public power in municipal government, the state of Vermont, in the ISO New England stakeholder process. Brian is an alumni of the University of Colorado Leeds Business School and Deming Center for Entrepreneurship, and he holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Management with a focus on resource economics from the University of Vermont. Yay, Brian, we're so glad to have you. But before we let you actually talk, I'd like to just spend just a minute or two talking a little bit about transactive energy, if that's okay. Transactive energy is all about the timely and efficient integration of distributed energy resources. And we talk about distributed energy resources, including solar, battery storage. You probably heard about electric vehicles to grid, and other technologies such as small scale hydro and wind. Here in New England and New Hampshire, we have a fairly robust competitive energy market for the bulk supply of energy in the regional interstate wholesale electricity market administered by ISO New England, which has developed over the last 26 years following the restructuring of the electric utilities in New England. In this market, large or bulk electricity generators, usually of greater than 5 megawatts capacity, participating in a day-ahead market priced at hourly intervals, and in a real-time market where people bid into the market in real time, where supply is settled at 5-minute intervals. Unfortunately, very little retail load, which is the retail electric customers like you and me, or the distributed energy resources, are able to respond to such price signals. The market for retail electricity services and DERs has failed to develop to provide appropriate price signals and choice for retail customers, us. We do not enable retail customers to participate in a retail energy market. How come? Well, some ways include the now, and how can we actually participate in that retail energy market? Some ways includes the now developing community power program starting this year, which enables aggregation of retail electric customers in New Hampshire with an aggregation group such as the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. Another way is by the co-op members is to rely on the co-op to shop for energy supply at the low best prices and terms, which is one reason why the co-op current power rates are the lowest in New Hampshire. Another way is to develop and implement a transactive energy model in New Hampshire that will allow retail distributed energy resources such as solar and our storage batteries and EVs to export their generation at times of peak demand on the electric grid. Transactive energy will harness the power of competitive markets to enable DERs to respond to temporal, in other words, timing market prices by either taking power from the grid at non-peak use hours or distributing and discharging power to the grid during peak use hours. Transactive energy is the distributed economic and control techniques to manage the flow or exchange of electricity within an existing power system based on economic and market-based values of energy. Tonight, you will hear from Brian about some pilots that the co-op is conducting that illustrates the potential power of transactive energy. So in a lot of words, that's really a process by which we can actually start to really utilize solar power that some of us generate on our rooftops, electric vehicles that are now starting to come into the market, and also battery storage to actually maximize the value of those resources to our retail electric grid. So with that, Brian, it's all yours.
Thanks, Joe. I can share my screen right now, but I think I would like to tell the group that what we will be talking about today is from a strategic planning effort that the co-op started when Joe was there. So due to his leadership and the other board members, of course, at the co-op, we came to develop 4 focus areas, of which moving towards a transactive energy business model was one of them. So without their leadership, we wouldn't really be talking about this tonight. So I wanted to make sure Joe got a little bit of a clap there because that was pretty impressive. Okay, I can go. You want me to go ahead and start sharing my screen now?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. You know, if that's successful. Should be seeing something that just says your New Hampshire Electric Co-op.
Yep, that's what we see.
Great. Okay. All right, there will be plenty of time for questions. And I think it'd be okay if folks want to go ahead and ask questions during the presentation if you'd like. Either way, doesn't really matter. We can do either one.
Why don't we just get through your presentation, Brian, then we'll open it up for general questions. Okay.
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 We're going to talk about the transactive energy rate pilot that we're working on right now. So I gave you a little bit of kind of the background that this is a strategic planning goal of the cooperative to help move the co-op towards more of a transactive energy business model in the future. I want to walk through what is the transactive energy rate pilot that we're talking about, which is kind of the foundation of a transactive energy business model. And I'm going to spend most of the time on what does it mean for the member. We are a cooperative, a nonprofit, and everything we do is about benefits for the members. So if there's nothing in it for the member, then why do it? So I want to focus on that. There's lots of words in this blue bubble here, but it's from a guy over at Volkswagen. I never checked to see if his math was right, but I think it's a nice quote to just put in everybody's minds the enormity of what happens when you've got a lot of folks drive around vehicles that have batteries in them. So according to this guy, Michael Jost, who's a chief strategist at Volkswagen, so that sounds like he should know what he's talking about. And this is just one car company, that they expect to have 350 gigawatt hours worth of energy storage in their electric car fleet. And then by 2030, 1 terawatt hours worth of storage. Now, according to Michael here, that's more energy than is currently generated by all the hydroelectric power stations in the world. That is quite the statement. So even if he's half wrong, that's a pretty impressive amount of energy that's going to be in vehicles. Now you can pretty much guarantee that much energy just for transportation, when you think about how you're using a car, you're not always driving somewhere. A lot of that time that car is just sitting there. Why not use it for something that can help out the rest of the folks that are on the distribution system? And this rate that we're talking about helps to encourage that. So here's a little bit about New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. 84 years ago, we were founded in 1939. It means next year's a big one, so I got to make sure people are aware of that. Got to do something for 85. There's roughly 230 of us that are serving 85,000 homes and businesses, which is 118 communities. That's a lot of communities in New Hampshire. But we're mainly rural in nature, so 15 services per mile. It is not a dense system. It's not a city system. We're the largest electric cooperative in all of New England, but we're the second largest electric utility in New Hampshire. Now, as I think everyone knows here, and I hope there are some members on the call tonight, we are open to retail competition, but we are the default service provider of energy. Now, the co-op, if someone wants to use energy from someone else, that's fine with us. We are just the default option. And I want to make sure it's clear for those members that are on the phone. If someone does decide to take energy from a competitive supplier, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't hurt the co-op. And then, of course, I hope that folks are aware that we launched a broadband business also to try to bring fiber to the home for all of the members that we have in New Hampshire, something that's needed. It's a little bit about the co-op. So let's jump into that strategic planning goal that I was talking about earlier. So this started back in 2017. Joe was still a board member. It became one of the focus areas for the strategic plan. But we had to figure out if it's a focus area, how do you move the company towards a transactive energy business model? What does that actually mean? So we started to kind of define how would we get us there. what would we use to get us there? And we came down to something using price signals. Now we're an electric utility. We understand price signals because we call them rates. So if we can develop a rate around this, then I think we're on comfortable ground. So that was the initial direction that we wanted to take. So then we spent a year figuring out how do you develop that rate. And then last year and the year before that, we started to test the mechanics of that rate. Develop the software so that that rate can be developed on a daily basis. How do you publish it? How do you account for it? How do you verify, report, and pay on folks that decide to use that rate? So 2 years of pretty intense testing on how to make this work. Now, we tried really hard to get this thing up and running by the end of the year in 2022, and we just didn't quite get there, but we're expecting to be there by the first quarter of 2023. And we want to launch it to all members. And when that happens, we will be publishing a price every day, actually 24 prices every day for the next day. Folks can see that price, schedule devices, respond, and then we will be able to compensate them or charge them for whatever their device was doing. And I'll get into this in more detail. And we're starting off with about 500 members that we want to open this up to, just to make sure that we got the test right. And the primary use cases that we're looking at right now are batteries. So if you've got a standalone battery that you have in a garage, or you want to purchase a battery that's doing that, that would work well for this program. And then also electric vehicles, which are big batteries on wheels. Okay. So here's, I've got a couple slides on examples of what that means. So in order to participate in this pilot, we're calling the Transactive Energy rate. Wish we had a different term because it's quite the mouthful, but that's where we ended up. In order to participate, you need to have a device that can respond to hourly prices. And what I mean by that is you need to be able to either use energy during low cost hours in order to take full advantage of it, or if you have the ability to discharge energy or push energy into the system, then you can take advantage of high cost hours and get credits. So before you can really sign up for this program, you need to be able to register something that you've already connected. So if you've got, say, a solar system and you decide to pair batteries with it, any device that would be pushing energy into the grid or back onto the distribution system, you would have to go through an interconnection process with the co-op. And that's because you can push energy onto the system. If you wanted to sign up, say, an electric vehicle, and you weren't using vehicle to grid technology so that you can take the energy from a car and push it into the system, just like you would a standalone battery, and you plan to just manage the charging schedule for that car, then you wouldn't have to do an interconnection agreement with the co-op, because you're just going to be using energy on a particular schedule. It's one direction. So that's the first step, is you need to find a device to register. We do think that similar to, say, an electric vehicle or managed charging electric vehicle, water heaters might be another example that we could use here, but we haven't got that one tested out yet. So once you have a device that can do those, either control its charging or control its discharging, you would call up the cooperative and we would sign you up. And when we sign you up, we create something called a virtual meter. So we don't go out and actually put a meter out there. We use the device's internal electronics itself to be the meter. And that metering gets put into our accounting system as a meter. It looks like a meter, just that was out there, but it's virtual. So once you have that all set up, after you've called us up and we've linked that account, we've linked that device to your account, it's just the device that's being recorded, not the whole house. And that was important for us because we didn't want folks to, if you couldn't control the device, or if you couldn't control the device during high cost hours, we didn't want the whole home being exposed to that. So this is definitely the members' control. So when that's all set up, you now have day ahead hourly price signals that the co-op is sending each day. So every day about 4 o'clock, we publish a 24 hours of pricing, which I'll show in a next slide here, for the next day. And what that allows the member to do is they can open up their laptop, or they can look at those prices and go ahead and schedule their device the next day based on the lowest cost hours or the highest cost hours, whatever they want that device to do. But we think that most folks will want to use something we're calling an aggregator. And I'll pick on General Motors because we're working with them on this program. So in this example, General Motors would go ahead and schedule the car that you allowed them to put a schedule on. So in that way, the member wouldn't have to actually wake up every morning, make the coffee, get breakfast going, try to get the kids on the bus, and then schedule their car or schedule their battery. Some folks will definitely want to do that, but we don't think everyone will be. That's not going to be the majority. So in this example, General Motors would schedule the best time to charge your car or the best time to discharge your car, if you were going to be using that, for the next day. And then after that day occurs, those devices then share that information with the co-op. Every day there's a report that gets sent back and said, look, this is when I charged my car, this is when I discharged my car. And that's what we record as kind of usage information. Looks like a meter. And that's what we either credit or charge your account on based on the hourly price that was occurring when that usage happened. And then that gets us to the fourth element here, which is once we have all that information, we calculate it for you and we can generate it and put it on your bill. So it'll just show up as a charge on your bill or a credit on your bill. So in a nutshell, that is the full kind of circle of information that is necessary for a transactive energy rate. This next slide shows an example kind of from a table perspective rather than just words. I'll go through on the left-hand side, I'll go through what the terminology is first, and then explain how this particular member has taken advantage of that day's transactive energy rate. This is a real day. This is on November 16th, 2022, relatively recent. This term hour ending is kind of a utility term. What it means is the hour ending is 1 a.m. So this box represents the time from midnight to 1 a.m. And then this next box represents the hour from 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. and so on and so on. This next value here is the TER. Actually, I think I can use the little pointer. This next value here is the transactive energy rate for that particular hour. And you'll see that in some hours, it'll start to change. Now, there's a possibility that each individual hour can have different pricing. This next line represents what the member decided to do with their battery. This example shows two standalone batteries, which have 5 kW worth of power that they can discharge. So when you multiply those together, you get 10 kilowatts that they can discharge in a given hour. And then this last line is what is the charge or credit associated with that action? So in this action here, the member has decided, or in this case, it could be the aggregator that has sold you the battery and you've allowed them to schedule the discharging and charging of that battery. That schedule for that day has identified that these 2 hours, hour ending 3 and hour ending 4, were the cheapest hours in the day. And the battery is empty before you started the day, so it needs to fill itself up. So it does that, and it does that at a cost of 60 cents in the first hour and 59 cents in the next hour. And then as you walk through the day, you see that, oh, and these an hour ending 17 and 18, which is from 4 to 5 p.m. and 5 to 6 p.m. Those were the highest cost hours, which is a great opportunity to go ahead and sell that energy back to the co-op. And when you do that, you sell all of the energy that you charged for in this example, and you created a credit of about roughly $15 in each hour. So all said and done during that hour or during that day, this member netted around $28 for the day. Now, this doesn't happen every day. You're not going to have these high costs in any given day, but you might see this 4 or 5 times a month. And I'll get into member benefits in a bit. So I hope that was helpful for explaining how it looks like during a particular day. Now, this could be any device. It doesn't have to be a battery. It could be a car. You could decide to, like I said, with a water heater, you can decide to just schedule your water heater to not actually heat water during these hours, which are the most costly hours. And the rest of the hours it could. That's how you might take advantage of it in that way. So that was one particular day that we were looking at. But what does it look like if you add 365 of those together? There's a lot of words on this slide, so I should probably trim it down. But I wanted to show some different examples for folks. I'll probably go through just the first 3 and just kind of mention a little bit on the last 2. So on this first one, the home battery, this is instead of 2 batteries, that the example that we went through before, this is just one of those batteries. This is a Tesla Powerwall that has about 13.5 kilowatt hours worth of energy in it, which means that this battery could basically fully discharge for almost 3 hours, but not quite. So every hour it could discharge 5 kilowatts. But when you look at you try to optimize the charging and discharging of that battery just for the transactive energy rate. This is not taking into account probably the main reason you purchased the battery, which was to make sure that if the lights went out, you would keep that freezer full and you wouldn't lose it if the outage extended beyond a day or so or 2. That's probably why you bought the battery, not for this project. But if you can find a way to help reduce the cost of that battery by gaining some credits to help pay down the initial cost, then you might take that opportunity. So in this example, you have tried to maximize the value on the battery throughout the whole year. And when we ran the transactive energy rate backwards, so we ran it for what would it have been in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, and we did an average. And roughly right around $1,200 is what the member could expect by trying to maximize the value on the transactive energy rate, which is a decent amount of money on an annual basis. Now, if you move towards, there's a lot of EVs that are getting out there, and we think that this is an area where most people would use this rate for. It would be for EV charging or vehicle to grid charging, and we'll talk about that one after this. But if you look at it just from an EV charger perspective, I've got here kind of modeled as a Nissan Leaf. This This first number is talking about how fast can you charge that car? How much energy can you put into it at once? And it's Nissan Leaf has a 6.6 kilowatt onboard charger for that. Now it's kind of similar then to the battery up above, but a little bit more. So a little bit more capacity that you can push onto the system or charge. Then the next one is it's how much energy is actually in that battery. So cars have big batteries because you want to be able to drive a long distance. So it's a lot bigger than the home battery. It's 62 kilowatt hours instead of 13.5 kilowatt hours. And then this next number is saying, if I decided to drive 13,500 miles a year, and I grabbed that off a lease payment, I think that's why that number is there. So when you look at all of this data together, and you say, well, if I went and I charged the car at the lowest cost hours on average, what would it have cost me? And I was driving 13,000 miles during that year, because otherwise I wouldn't have to charge it. I would just keep it full all the time. And when we looked at that, fueling your vehicle on electricity is a lot less expensive than fueling it on gasoline. The average cost that we saw was around $350 a year to fill the car and drive 13,000 miles. So that's a lot less expensive than it is to fill up a car with gasoline. And I have an example at $4 a gallon. So thankfully I should update this because now we're closer to $3.20. So I should use something smaller. But this represents roughly $1,800 a year in savings for that family that purchased that electric vehicle versus what they would have paid if they were in a regular internal combustion engine car that was getting 25 miles per gallon. So it's real value that can help the budget out for that family. Now, the third example that I have here is when you kind of combine the top two. So you're driving the car around, you still want to go 13,000 miles. You still want to go 13,000 miles. But instead of just charging the car, you also decide that you want to discharge the car when the costs are high on the transactive energy rate. So you want to sell services back to the co-op, necessary services back to the co-op when those services are worth the highest value. So you kind of combine the top two, and when you do that, you've driven 13,000 miles for the year, but you're actually left with a $1,200 credit after you've driven. So rather than a charge for filling your car up, because you've provided those services as a co-op when it was necessary or when they were needed and highly valued, the co-op helped give you bill credits to compensate you for that, the services that you provided. And when you add that together with savings versus an internal combustion engine at 25 miles per gallon, that's $3,300 a year, $3,350. Now you're starting to talk about, a fairly significant amount of benefit on an annual basis, actually on a monthly basis. Now these are the primary use cases that we think folks will use the transactive energy rate for. But you could also do it with a solar system. But the net metering rates are also quite good. So there's not much of a difference in benefit between those two. But if you were to add a battery to that PV system, you'd start to see some higher credits because it'd be kind of similar to the first home battery example that we had up here. So that's why you would do a transactive energy rate, and that's why the co-op has set it up this way, because we see that this can provide real value to our members. Now that's all in theory, right? That's all something that someone's done on spreadsheets, and we've tried to make sure that it all works. But we are super lucky to have Plymouth State University as a member. They helped us test this rate out to make sure that all the technology works. So Plymouth State, they agreed to get a couple Nissan Leafs. So a Nissan Leaf has the capability to be have a bidirectional charger attached to it, which means you can use the energy that's in the car and dispatch it onto the grid. I think right now that's the only vehicle that does that, although General Motors, we'll talk about in a minute, is looking to do the same thing. So they got some Leafs. We helped them with that. We helped them find it. We didn't help pay for it. Plymouth State did that, took that effort. But we found a bidirectional charger that they could use, and they contracted with a company called Fermata Energy that makes that charger. You'll see here that the values are significantly different just because the chargers are bigger. So rather than a 6.6 kilowatt charger, this one is a 15 kilowatt charger. That's what's been installed at the Plymouth State campus now. But Fermata Energy, they created 2 connections there. They've only got 1 charger in there, but they're going to hopefully within a couple months or so, they're going to take that 15 kilowatt charger, remove it, and they're going to put 2 20 kilowatt chargers there. And the reason they want to do that is the larger the larger the capacity of the charger, the more value you can create, which makes sense if we think about that earlier slide with the hourly costs. If you've got a fairly high value in one particular hour, the larger the capacity is the higher credit you can get, which is simply the math of 7 kilowatts times $1 versus 20 kilowatts times $1. The latter one being a little bit more value. So that's why Plymouth State's looking to move it up to a 20 kilowatt versus a 15 kilowatt. Now, Plymouth State doesn't have to do anything here, so we wanted to test that technology as well. Fermata Energy sees the transactive energy rate that we publish every day. They run it through their algorithms that they have in the cloud, do the magic, and then they send a schedule to the individual car, which is actually the charger, as to whether to charge or discharge that vehicle. And when we do that, that anticipated value is $4,000 a year versus, I think what I said earlier was around $1,200. So it's a significant amount of benefit that you can get from going ahead and using that battery, which is a pretty big battery, and helping to provide services to the cooperative. Now, that's one of the questions I've gotten off of this slide as well. Do you just have to have the car stuck in the garage hooked up to the discharge to the bidirectional charger all the time, or can you drive it around? And of course you've got the car, so you could drive it around. You didn't get it just for this program. So what happens is if you can't make any credits, or you can't charge the car during low cost hours unless it's connected. But if you decide to disconnect that car, and instead you need to run to the mall, or you're going up to the ski area, and you're a student and you're trying to get some skiing in, and you might miss a discharge event, it's not going to probably change this value all that much. There's about there's about 150 hours to 200 hours per year that this would actually occur. And it's usually in the afternoon. So the car only reacts to the schedule if it's plugged in. So thanks to PSU for helping us test this out. This has been running since July. So every day they're seeing and charging and discharging that car based on the rate that we send them on a daily basis. And it's working. So additional integrations, we talked about the Fermata Energy one, is we're working with General Motors, which is pretty exciting. It's a pretty big car company. They like the transactive energy rate, and they want to find a way to get members that are cooperative members, and they want to buy electric vehicles. How can General Motors help keep that cost of ownership as low as possible for them. So we've worked with the integration. They actually are fully integrated. We haven't tested it with a car yet, though, so we're working on that part first. We were hoping to get that hooked up in December, but now we're looking at sometime during this quarter, hopefully in a month or so. We're going to test it first with some Chevy Bolts and Chevy Volts, where they'll use the OnStar program that they have in those cars in order to connect with the car and tell it when to charge. This is not discharging at this point, it's just charging. So that's exciting. We'll be able to see how that works with General Motors sending those commands down to those cars directly, not the charger, but the car. And then in the end of Q2 2023, the Chevy Silverado, which is their truck, their electric truck that they're putting out, that one will be able to do vehicle to grid. So they want to test that one out with the Transactive Energy rate for co-op members. And then they want to add additional GM models during the term of the program. And our agreement with them runs through the 2023. And then we're also working with a company called Generac, which has standalone batteries that you can put in say in a garage or in a basement somewhere. So you could charge and discharge that battery based on that schedule that you have with the Transactive Energy rate. And then Flow chargers Flow is the name of the charger for electric vehicles. So you can also get a charger that Generac can see and control based on that Transactive Energy rate. And we're hoping to have them fully integrated by the end of Q1.
I wanted to show everybody
Just a kind of a picture of what those bidirectional chargers look like. This is the Plymouth State University installation on the left here. The part that says FE is that's the actual charger, bidirectional charger. And here's a meter to give you perspective on how big it is. It's not tiny, but it's also not gargantuous. It's not huge.
there should be 2 of these, another month or two.
And then I also wanted to show what does Ford's version look like of a bidirectional charger, and it's much smaller. 80 amps, it's about the same size, almost 20 kilowatts. And the cost for that is pretty reasonable. And that's based on what Ford says the costs are. I don't know what General Motors is going to charge. And I believe there's an additional device that's needed to get it all hooked up. So this is not $1,300. It's not an all-in installed price. There's some additional apparatus that you need in order to make this work. Okay, so this is me. That's what I had for tonight, Joe. I can go ahead and drop my slides or leave them up for questions or.
Okay. Well, Brian, I think we'll go into a Q&A time, and we have quite a few questions that have actually been submitted by our folks listening in tonight. I just might have one comment that I think what you're seeing with what the co-op is doing is a view of tomorrow, a view of what people hopefully will be able to do with their own V2G cars and trucks in the years to come. The challenge will be to make sure that these experiments actually work, and they seem to be, and to get the other investor-owned utilities in the state, Eversource, Liberty, and Unitil, to actually go down the same road and offer these to their customers. But Brian, why don't I ask this? I'll ask some of the questions that have been posed. Does that sound fair? We have can you hear me?
Yes, John, go.
Okay. We have a question from Bill Brown of Hanover, New Hampshire. And he's asked, will Transactive Energy also include demand reduction by consumers? My Ecobee thermostat will respond to signals to automatically raise or lower temperature, but we need really a billing system that reflects our response to price signals. We need modern meters to do this. Do you have any thoughts on that, Brian?
So thermostats, like an Ecobee, is maybe I should drop this.
Sure.
A little bit more community oriented here.
Here we go.
Brian, we can't hear you. You're in and out.
You get closer.
Closer to the mic, maybe?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, a little better.
Let's see what happened here. Oh, how about that?
Sometimes you've come in actually louder than that.
Ooh. Not sure what to tell you.
Can everyone hear?
Yeah, you start to talk and it's quiet and then you come in full volume for some reason.
Yeah.
It takes a while to kick in.
Okay. Well,
Just-
I'm not sure
90% of the time you're good.
All right,
Yeah.
I'll just keep talking. How about
Keep-
that?
keep
If
going.
I keep talking, you can hear me okay?
Okay. So on
There
the
we go.
thermostat, it's a little bit more difficult because the devices that we've talked about earlier, you can actually see the energy usage on an hourly basis. Now with a thermostat, we use a kind of a system called measurement and verification, where you kind of look at something called 5 and 10. You would look back and say, hey, I need to develop a baseline of what I normally do with the energy use during a certain temperature. And then when I want to do an event, you run the event and you look at the difference between that baseline that you established and what the event was. And then that would be your, say, benefit or credit from doing the event. That's a little bit harder on this program. I'm not going to say that down the road it couldn't happen, but it's harder to get actual energy use there. So right now, thermostats are kind of down the road.
Okay, Brian. How about another question from Jennifer Smith? I've been looking for a V2G to use with my Leaf, but all the current manufacturers seem to be only interested in fleet sales. When are we likely to have these available for consumers?
Okay, well, I gave you a company name called
Moderator Energy. So you might want to give them a call. Maybe they've got one that they could sell for you, sell to you. But when I look at the work that we're doing with General Motors and also Ford, we're not working directly with Ford, so I can't talk about that car company. But I know that if everyone remembers the pretty fancy car commercial that they put on, where they saw the car and the car was helping run the house. That's a vehicle to home situation. Now getting vehicle to the grid, which is what we're talking about here, there's not that much of a step to do that. So I showed you a picture of what the Ford vehicle to grid charger would look like, and they've got a price there that they think they can sell it for. And I know General Motors is working hard to try to get something going with that, say Q3, Q4 of next year. But if you wanted to do it right now, you could call Moderator Energy and try to get one of their chargers for your Nissan Leaf.
So it's a work in progress. Very good. Susan?
I had some interesting questions that are not vehicle specific. Paul Panish wanted to know about how this could be done at a community level. And maybe, Paul, why don't you come on and explain your thinking better than I have?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, my question was basically, I'm wondering if there are any issues with the transactive energy model being implemented within a community power infrastructure. So if a community has now become the default energy provider, still has the same distribution utility, are there any issues with implementing a system like this or having customers in their homes having installed the system like this, being able to interwork with your systems, I guess.
understand the question.
So there would be some difficulty there, Paul, if you were to be in a community power aggregation. And the reason for that is a lot of the benefit that you saw in that if you remember the table that I showed where you had all 24 hours worth of costs, or what the 24 hours of the rates were, there were two particular hours that were quite high. And the reason for that is that's often on a monthly basis that will be transmission related. And because it's transmission related, it's not in the same bucket of money that a community power aggregation will be providing to that community. There's kind of two buckets when you think about paying for the energy that's flowing on a distribution system. One is transmission related, and the other is energy related. A community power aggregation will help you come up with different costs for the energy side of it, but the transmission side will still be what's being provided by the distribution system. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Do you foresee at any point in the future that a CPA would be able to participate in something like this, even if it was only with the energy portion? I understand the transmission portion
Oh,
would be.
yeah, I think the energy side,
Side, you could do that. And on the energy side, there's not just, I mentioned that during every month, there's a transmission element that you could use to help show those high prices that would be a benefit to someone that wanted to dispatch energy into the distribution system. But there may be a way to do it during the capacity months, which are usually during the summer, where those prices also can get quite high. So there may be some unique opportunities from a community power aggregation element where you could just use that capacity component. But I can tell you, Paul, that I haven't spent a lot of time looking on how a community power aggregation could take advantage of it, but we have spent a lot of time on how co-op members could take advantage of it.
If I can jump in right, if I could jump in right now, to actually go a little bit further, we have on the line with us Cliff Below, who's the chairman of the Community Power Coalition and one of the main architects of the Community Power Program. So, Cliff, would you have any comments about that question about community aggregation?
Yes, broadly. In fact, the whole idea for Lebanon Community Power originated about almost 6 years ago now, coming out of the last net metering proceeding, where we proposed to do a transactive energy pilot with regard to solar and other distributed energy resources. And kind of out of that, partially grew Liberty's battery pilot idea, because we posited that if you could credit distributed energy resources, both demand response, storage, and generation, with sort of being able to access the real-time price and respond to those prices, take advantage of the lows and help shave the peaks. And manage that also to reduce transmission cost and capacity allocation, that there should be a way to recognize that value. And that sort of reflected in the value stack that's kind of come out of the value of distributed energy resources study that was recently completed. But with regard to community power, that has been, this sort of evolved because we were trying to do an opt-in program, and the PUC actually even ordered Liberty to work with us to implement this, but there were obstacles both with the existing municipal aggregation law at the time, because they couldn't give us the names and addresses of customers, and you couldn't do an opt-in program unless you did a mailing to everybody in the community. So that out of that came the idea of the legislation to enable opt-out community aggregation and to require that the utilities provide that data. And we've been through a couple of years now of getting rules in place and actually have made some significant progress with the rules, but it turns out that none of the utilities are really able to fully comply with the rules at this point. But one of the provisions that we fought for was the ability to manage rates differently than the utility, to be able to calculate the bills on our own and to potentially install or share the cost of the new metering that would be needed to provide the interval data to enable access to such, price signals, if you will. sort of rates in the wholesale market. So that there are practical obstacles right now in terms of the utilities data systems to both and of course the metering infrastructure. But that's what we're trying to work to enable.
Thanks, Cliff. So we can see there's some movement afoot to try to establish those capabilities in the Community Power Coalition too.
And Senator Waters will be introducing legislation that goes to this point to take some further steps in enabling these things, storage, vehicle to grid, to participate and have access to those kinds of price signals.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So we hope to be able to help make that happen.
Yep. A brave new world. Let's go on to some other questions. If we could have the next person is Beth McGinn. Can you actually come on and ask your question? All
I
right, Beth,
can, and actually, I have a few questions. Which one would you like me to ask?
let's do one. Go ahead.
All right. I'm really excited about this, and I think it's the solution to a lot of problems that we have. I wonder, though, and I just don't know the answer, what might this do to the lifespan of the battery or the reliability of the battery, whether it be a home battery or a car battery? Does anybody know that yet?
I can try that one, Joe.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so I can speak to the Nissan Leaf. So the Nissan still warranties their battery. I'm not sure exactly what the warranty is, but they wouldn't allow vehicle to grid for the battery, using the energy in the battery for discharging and not transportation, if they felt that was going to be a problem with their warranty. So it's in their book. So you can assume that it's okay.
All right. Thanks.
Great. How about let's see, I see Michael Prang about the Ford F-150 Lightning. Does that support the vehicle to grid also? Michael?
Oh, my comment is just that I had heard that it does. I don't, so I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Okay. So we know it does. Next question, Paul Friedrichs, would you like to pipe in about your question about the PUC?
I know the PUC likes to throw roadblocks on things, especially if they considered elitist, like all these electric vehicle owners and solar panel owners trying to put money into the system would get net metered for it. But does this require, or did it require approval by the PUC?
Joe, you can take that one. Oh, or I can. So the New Hampshire Electric Co-op, our rates are approved by our board of directors, of which Joe used to be a member of. We don't have our rates approved by the Public Utility Commissioners.
So what Brian is saying is that the PUC will be involved with this, especially for the other investor-owned utilities in New Hampshire. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, good question. Another question.
And the follow-up, if this came before the PUC from Unitil, for example, and the PUC, of course, turned down electric vehicle chargers that Unitil wanted to put in, do you think the PUC would allow Unitil to offer this exchange?
That's a good question, Paul, but there are some bills that are pending in this session of the legislature that's precisely dealing with that issue about make-ready work for chargers around the state. So there may be a legislative fix to that, hopefully. Okay. How about Sarah Thorne? Do you want to pose your question? Sarah, are you still on? Here we go.
Hi, yes, thank you. This is fascinating, and I'm just starting to absorb it. I'm a co-op member, and I have a Chevy Bolt, and I'm intrigued about all this, but I'm wondering if GE is going to be controlling when I can charge my battery. But perhaps I really need to charge it on peak hours, on a particular day or week. am I going to be able to do that?
Yeah, so Sarah, I can
Tell you what General Motors has told us on how that would work. So every day they would schedule that car by sending something over the airwaves, over the internet to the car itself, not the charger, but the car itself. And then if you wanted to go ahead and not follow that schedule, I think there's one of three things that you could do. One, you could go to your charger and kind of do just like you would do with a computer that's acting up on you. You would disconnect it and then reconnect it, and then everything goes away. So that's how you kind of override your system on a General Motor car for scheduling. And that's how they've got it planned. Another way you could do it is there's an app that they have on a telephone, which everyone has an app now. You could go ahead and opt out that way. And then I think there's supposed to be a way to do it on the little screen that you see in your car, also to change the charging schedule there. So that's what they've told me for if you want to go ahead and opt out of the schedule for that day. Now, the nice part about that is you don't have to return it on. The next day, the schedule will come down again. So you don't have to go and reboot something.
Interesting. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. We have a question from Reimar Siedler. Reimar, would you like to pose your question?
Oh, sure, yeah. It's sort of a practical question. I'm just curious if you're discharging at high rate times, like say during the afternoon, is there a risk that you'd end up without power at a moment when you might need it for, say, an emergency or something unexpected? Will it drain the battery entirely if possible, or is there a limit to what it'll take? That kind of thing. I can imagine there could be some risk involved with that.
So I'll answer that one, Reinmar, for both a car and say a standalone chart or standalone battery. So in the car example, there are, we'll call them user preferences, right? So when you sign up your car for this program and you allow GM to go ahead and schedule the maximum value to try to get the maximum value for your family, you are going to provide them with some parameters that you want to kind of guide them on. And one of those parameters would be never discharge my car more than, say, 40 miles worth of usage. So I always want to be able to get to the hospital, and you live somewhere far away and it's 40 miles to get to the hospital, something of that nature. So you get to choose what that level of maximum drain would be on that vehicle. And then you could also do some user parameters about I always need to get to work by 9 a.m. So I need at least 20 miles in the car by 8. You can do whatever you want up to 8 o'clock, but by 8 o'clock, I need 20 miles to get to work. So that's another type of parameter that you can provide the manufacturer. From a battery perspective, you might have heard about this with like Tesla's program, I think with Liberty, and then there's some other battery manufacturers out there that have something similar, where if you're expecting a storm, so we just had a horrible storm over the Christmas break, and that left a lot of folks without power. And one of the main reasons you purchased a battery, a standalone battery, was to maintain energy in your home, to keep that freezer going or keep that refrigerator going. Some of those providers are also looking at weather forecasts, and they will call something called storm mode, or I think it's called that, something like that, where they won't allow any, they'll prep the battery so that it has maximum amount of energy to ride through that storm. So even if you wanted to do something and there was an event during that time, which there wouldn't be because it's a storm, it would discard all of that. It would try to keep as much power in that battery for your use to ride out the outage.
Cool.
Great. Thanks, Brian. We have someone here from Revision Energy, James Penfold. James, would you like to pose a question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hi, Brian. I'm curious to know how the transactive rates were impacted, if at all, during the Christmas Eve energy price spike?
Yep. So what James is talking
About is there were some pretty high real-time prices that occurred during December 24th in New England. There was actually a capacity scarcity condition that was declared during that, where there was some concern on whether or not there was enough capacity on the system to cover all the generation that was needed for the energy and something called reserve units, basically. So something on reserve just in case something tripped off. So because of that, real-time prices shot very high. This particular rate is based on a different market called day ahead, which is the day before. So those real-time prices would not have gotten into that transactive energy rate.
Okay, thanks. And then the second question, you mentioned about the flow charges. They're bi-directional, I assume. Are they AC level 2s? You know, like low kilowatt as opposed to the Fermata DC units?
So the flow charger that
I mentioned there is not bi-directional. It's one direction.
Okay.
So you could do a managed charging program, which still provides a decent amount of value. If you remember the member benefits slide. I don't know the charge rate, but I think you're right about 7 to 11 kW. I think that's about the right amount for that charger. They're out there though. If you type in flow into Google, you'll get a bunch of answers back.
Awesome.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, James. Folks, we're going to go till 7 o'clock. It's now about 6:40, so we've got 20 minutes. Stay on if you'd like. We'll try to get through all the questions that have been posed on the chat. Okay. Next question we've got from Deb Munson. Deb, would you like to pose your question?
Sure. I'm not sure which one.
Anything you'd like.
I posted a few out there. I guess my question is, are NHEC customers privileged to be able to do and the investor-owned utilities jump on board with this, or is this kind of against their profit motives, and will this be available to other New Hampshire utility customers?
Deb, I work for
The New Hampshire Electric Cooperative, so I can't really speak for any other utility that's out there. But this is a pilot that we are hoping to offer our members by the end of Q1 2023. But you would need to be in the service territory of the co-op.
If I can jump in here for a second, Cliff Below mentioned briefly that there's a piece of legislation that Senator Waters is introducing to the legislature this year that takes the first steps forward on transactive energy in trying to encourage the utilities, the PUC in the state to move forward on some of the first steps we would need to move towards transactive energy. So hopefully sometime in the future, the IOUs will accommodate this also. One thing that Brian didn't mention is that transactive energy also has the ability to really minimize the amount of future investment needs to be made in the distribution system. If you can optimize both the flow of energy to and from homes or from businesses, you can actually use that to leverage that to minimize the amount of capital investment needed in the future within this distribution system. So there's a lot of elements of positivity here that I think will be brought about by this moving the grid to, I'll call it the next step. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Let me see. We have Paul Parrish. Would you like to pose your question?
I think that was me. I already did ask my question.
Okay, great. Fine, we'll move on to Rebecca McWilliams, who is one of the ranking members, minority ranking members on the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee of the House. Rebecca, go ahead.
There's my unmute. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I had asked about the co-op coming to Concord because my constituents want it. And also, we are looking at smart meters. We've got a bill on that in the House. Right now, we don't think we're going to be able to get any money for smart meters. So it's really about creating a pathway to smart meters for utility customers who would like to opt in and get one for their home, pay their own money for it. And hopefully that will make it more popular so that the utilities will get on board.
Okay, Rebecca, thank you. Any more questions?
Does the,
Well, I was
just to
asking
follow
when
up on
it
that,
comes
does the co-op have plans to move to expand or move to other places? What does that look like, Brian?
Rainmar. So we have a franchise territory that is kind of set in stone. Sometimes you have some small parts of that territory that might be moved to another utility because it might be easier to serve because you'll have distribution lines that are at the right capacity in order to serve that new load that's showing up there. But for the most part, those franchise territories are kind of set in stone. So utilities like Eversource's franchise territory and Liberties and Unitils, those are going to probably remain the same for quite some time.
Yeah, I think Raimar, you're wandering into a very sensitive area among the utilities.
I can imagine.
Number of customers equals revenue, so none of them are going to be interested in reducing their revenue or their customers. So
Yeah.
the interesting thing about the co-op is it was formed in 1939 by the legislation introduced by the Roosevelt administration to serve areas of the country for which the investor-owned utilities would not serve. They thought there was no revenue to be gained. So the Rural Electrification Act was put in place in the late 1930s, creating co-ops all around the country. And they're called rural electric co-ops because it's primarily serving the rural areas of the United States. And they've become an incredibly successful model over the last 85 years to serve the rural portions of our country. And the co-op is the only one in New Hampshire because there were areas within New Hampshire, including areas like Plymouth, the areas around the lakes region, up north in Colebrook, the Conway area. They are a part of that co-op service area that were underserved by the investor-owned utilities back in the late 30s. So the co-op was created. And I think the first pole was put up in Leominster, New Hampshire in 1939. It was just taken out of service a few years ago. So very successful model.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see, Bruce Nordland, do you have a question?
Yes. I'm wondering, do you have any information about whether Tesla is going to be able to go to vehicle to grid? I have an older Tesla, but it doesn't have that feature.
Bruce, I'm sorry.
I don't have the answer to that. I did hear though that one of their first cars, you remember you said an older Tesla, maybe you have a Roadster. You remember the Roadster?
No,
Okay.
It's a 2017 Model S.
Oh, okay. I was told that one of the first Roadsters or first editions of the Roadster did have vehicle to grid in the system. And I'm not sure why they changed it, but it makes me think about that first quote that I showed you guys from Volkswagen. There's just a significant amount of energy that in vehicles, and just to have it sit there and not do anything with it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in the long run. So I imagine manufacturers will all allow this to happen in the future, but who knows? And I wanted to mention something that on Leominster, because Joe mentioned it as one of the first polls that was put up for the co-op. Just by chance, and it didn't happen because by design, I don't think, that was also the first spot where we did broadband. So when we started broadband, we did it in Leominster. So it really tied together nicely. First part for electricity and first part for that new venture on broadband.
Thank you,
Thank
Brian.
you.
Next question, Wayne King, I see you've got a question. It seemed like we may have already answered it, but do you have a follow-on question?
Well, I guess it was sort of answered when Joe said, "Don't step there."
You got it. You got it.
The question is, I've heard through rumor control, let's say, that there are a number of the investor-owned utility companies that are dragging their feet big time on this particular issue, and wondering whether there was some kind of carrot and stick that could be implemented through legislative action. Specifically, the question is, could you say, if you want to expand your transmission authority anywhere in the state in the future, you've got to offer transactive options to the consumers? Is that, I'm not asking you, Brian, because that would be a conflict of interest for you to answer the question, but I'm posing the question just, I guess, for all of the folks who are here and who are active with legislators and others who might want to consider that.
Yeah, Wayne, I would, as we mentioned before, there is a bill in the Senate, right? There will be a bill in the Senate this year, put in by Senator Waters, dealing with this issue. And I would ask everyone here to really, through their state senators and ultimately their state reps, to support that bill as it moves right through the legislature. And I think that would be certainly a thing that we as members of the public can certainly do.
If I might, that's still just an LSR. The title of the bill is relative to grid modernization. So if you're looking for the bill, at some point, it'll probably have a number in a week or so. So relative to grid modernization.
Yeah.
I could add a little bit to that,
Joe, if you want.
Go ahead, Brian.
So the components, I hope the sound is working okay. The components that make up the transactive energy rate that the co-op has here for the pilot, they're made up of the energy and the transmission components on the bill. And regardless of the utility that you are using in the state of New Hampshire, there's no margin or there's no profit associated with those components of a bill. So there's not really there's no real reason to, I'm not sure how to explain that any further. If it's really a cost, it's just a cost that's being passed through to the members or the customers that are in that utility. So there's no additional profit. So there's no real interest of the utility to try to maintain that, right? Because there's no profit that's being associated with it. So there, hopefully that's, I didn't bumble that up too much, but there's not really a drive to not provide something like that. And then the other way I can tell you how the co-op is looking at this is the co-op needs services from somewhere, and it can get those services from ISO New England. It can get those services from another energy provider, or it can get those services from its own membership. So we try to, if the cost of those services are, say, $100, and we don't want to send that $100 to Massachusetts, and instead we'll send it to the Kwasnik family because they're providing the same services, there's really no difference to the co-op on where those services are coming from. So if you can provide the opportunity to have those services go to the membership, you might as well do it. So that's one of the reasons that the rate has been put together.
And that whole principle of the cost of energy, the utilities are supposed to be agnostic about that, as Brian was just explaining. I think some of the hurdles that the IOUs may be having to deal with here is that their infrastructure is still fairly antiquated. There's really not much in the way of I'll call smart metering, automatic metering infrastructure. So there's maybe a lot of investment that will have to be made in addition to like making ready for electric chargers around the system. So there's a lot of infrastructure work that would need to be done to make this happen. Let's move on to the next question. We've got Bill Brown. you asked a pretty good technical question. Could you pose that for us?
Okay, okay, I better look at that question just again. Okay, so I think we have pretty much covered it. You did say that the market that we are being, or your customers are being put into, is the day ahead market. So whatever happens in the actual day for rates is not going to affect their bill whatsoever. Is there any, I guess in my mind, is there any opportunity for us as homeowners to be able to take our entire home and plan it in the same way that we're planning just specific devices, as well as having meters that are meters and billing systems that break it down not only into hourly but 5-minute increments for when the prices really do surge. We can respond to that and like turn off the oven, or let's delay dinner tonight, that kind of thing, as opposed to the system that you have there, which is only for specific units and only in the day ahead pricing.
So Bill, I can provide some answers on
that, and I want to make sure I was clear too. So the kind of the foundation of the rate that we're using is the day ahead market, but when you're using the energy, it's the next day. So it's not that the day that you're actually using the energy is the day ahead. So that might have actually made it less clear, but it's not, we're not in the real-time market, we're in the day ahead market. And the only reason we did that, and what the co-op is doing there, is we're taking a position that we will honor what the prices were from the day before. So that's the base of the rate, but there are many other components that get added onto it. The other part of your question was about could the whole home sign up, and why did we go with, this is what I inferred from it anyway, why did we go with devices? And there was a main reason for that, is that we wanted the member to have a positive experience on this rate as much as possible. Some of those costs can get quite high. So if your home is on that rate and you're not able to control the energy use for the home during those particular hours, say you're away, or maybe you've got some children and they decided to have a hot tub party, or who knows. In that case, you weren't able to go ahead and control that energy use for those particular hours, and the bill might be a little bit higher than you would have liked. To minimize that, you can instead just allow the devices that have controls in your home to respond to these devices. So I doubt that your children that stayed home for that party would go and maybe turn the battery on in the garage. So the idea there first was to allow it only to devices so that you can help control them, keep the member experience as high as possible.
Thank you.
Question from, I'm trying to make sure that we can consolidate the questions that we've already answered. We have a question from Bernie Volz. Would you like to enunciate that question, Bernie?
It wasn't a question, it was just a statement.
Okay, okay. Let's move to Susan Richmond. Susan, do you have any questions you'd like to ask? You've got.
Well, I can't imagine how a company whose goal is to make profit would do well when the customer is given the power to pay the least and get repaid the most. So why would investor-owned utilities want this at all?
Ryan, do you want to tackle that one?
I don't think I can tackle it, Joe, from an investor-owned specific, but I can do it from the co-op's perspective. So
co-op would be good. Thank you.
So the reason for the variability in the price and is it Susan? The reason for the variability in the price is to what Joe was talking about earlier. So the cost is lowest when there's the most capacity on the system. So you kind of want to fill up the capacity as much as you can in those areas, in those times, because the cost is lower, which means you have adequate supply, adequate room to add that energy. When the power is very expensive, that's when the cost would go quite high. You kind of want to move power use from those periods to those lower periods. But if you want to go ahead and use it, like we had a question earlier about, I need to charge the car because I got to go somewhere during those high cost hours, you'll have to pay for it. So during those particular hours where the cost is high, you could use energy, but it's going to cost a lot more. And if you were to, one of the questions in the chat kind of was alluding to this, if you were to shift that energy use that goes from those high cost hours into those low cost hours, you're kind of helping everybody, because the distribution system now is getting a much more efficient use of those lines that you've invested in for the last 84 years. Rather than asking for new investment in order to increase the size of those lines during those peak periods, you're now providing an opportunity to use the same amount of investment that you've done for the lines that you have today, because they can do more, because you've now moved that high energy use to those lower energy. So it's in the benefit of any distribution system to try to shift energy to those lower cost hours, I should say. Lower use hours is another way to think about it.
Thanks, Brian. We're almost at the end of our hour and a half. Brian, I have one question for you that might be helpful for folks, is that today, when you receive an electric bill, you have one rate that you pay, but that's not really reflective of what the utility is paying for that rate over a 24-hour period, which varies, as Brian was explaining, varies from hour to hour. With the utilities, because of metering issues and other simplistic approaches, just charge you one rate, no matter what the time of day is or what the day is. So this transactive energy, from my point of view, actually charges customers or members what they're actually incurring during that 24-hour period. Also, what's also interesting here is that this is really a market-driven phenomenon. So it should really be a bipartisan approach that I think both parties can actually buy into, because it is a market-driven phenomenon. So anyways, folks, we've come to the end of our hour. We've squandered the last 90 minutes on, I think, some really good stuff. And I want at this point to thank Brian for all of his information and his patience with us, and some really good answers to some really good questions. So Brian, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming over and talking with us. We'll have you back in January 2024 for some other challenging subject. Okay.
If not before.
So I'm going to turn it over to Reimar. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to quickly share my screen here and ask Susan to talk a little bit about what's coming up next for New Hampshire Network.
Well, very soon, January 24th, and Clifton Below is one of the featured speakers, celebrating community power in New Hampshire. That beginning with April, a number of communities are going to turn the switch and start community power. So it's really a historic date. There'll be a number of speakers, and the particular event, we are one of the participating sponsors, but a number of different groups are part of it. So we really hope that you'll partake of it and tell your friends about it. And then February 13th, a Monday, toward a climate resilient New Hampshire. And Reimar, that's with Roger Stevenson of Union of Concerned Scientists, right? About a study on what is going on in the various New England states, and how does New Hampshire compare? And I hope it's not too gloomy a report. But we do have regular working group meetings, plastics, twice a month, always on alternate Sundays. So the next one, January 22nd, And then monthly meetings, climate work group, next will be February 6th, and legislation with Joe Kwasnik on February 14th. It will be a sweet event on Valentine's Day. Okay, and our website address, newhampshirenetwork.org. Shout out to Patsy Beffinagrini and John Gage, who keep that just filled with wonderful resources, but that's where you will find the recording for today's event. And anytime you're wondering what's going on or when work groups are meeting, all that information can be had on the network.
Thanks,
Back to
Susan.
you.
And thank you,
Susan, and thank you so much, Brian, for being here, and thank you for the whole audience and the questions. And we will, a lot of information to keep thinking about, and we will keep thinking about it, and we'll keep sharing. So, so stay in touch. Thank you all very much.